Chapter 16, Dynasty 25, the Ethiopians. Towards the end of the 9th century, Egypt had far too much to do in defending herself to trouble about her supremacy in the south, which she had heretofore so carefully guarded. Viceroys of the south and kings' sons of Kush are now struck out of the official list of court dignitaries, and the kings of Kush take their place. The whole south, from the boundary line at the sea Asyan, recovered its freedom, and the Ethiopians began to enjoy a state of independence. Meanwhile, if the power of Egypt was no longer felt, Egyptian civilization had survived. All that was wanting was a leader. Nothing could have appeared more opportune for the priest of Yemen than this state of things in Nubia and Ethiopia, where the minds of an imperfectly developed people must needs, under skillful guidance, soon show themselves pliable and submissive to the dominant priestly class. Mountain Barkal, where Imhotep III, I don't remember how exactly you pronounce that really, but I did in an earlier program, had already raised sanctuary for the great Yemen of Thebes in the form of a strongly fortified temple city, was the site chosen by the newly arrived priests for the seat of their future royalty. The capital of this kingdom of Kush was Napata, which is so often mentioned in the inscriptions of Ethiopian origin. It is difficult to say who it was of the race of Herhor that first made preparations for the foundation of that Ethiopian kingdom, which became afterwards so dangerous to the Egyptians. The Egyptian monuments, from which their cartouches have been carefully erased by a latter Egyptian dynasty, gave not the slightest information on the point. So much the more important, therefore, is the circumstance that several successors of this priest, among whom was the son and successor of Herhor, but with the same name, namely that of the priest king Yanki, an Egyptian word which signifies the living one. Yanksi, okay. The several enthroned at Napata, the city of the Holy Mountain, called himself king of the land of Kush. The Theban Yemen Ra was reverenced as the supreme entity of the country. The king's full name was formed exactly according to the Egyptian pattern. The Egyptian language and writing, divisions of time, and everything else related to manners and customs were preserved. A distinguished position was assigned to the mother, daughters, and sisters of the king, each of whom bore the title of Queen of Kush. In the course of time, the power of the Ethiopians increased until at last the whole of Patoris came into the possession, and the great city of Nia, that is Thebes, became their capital. While the Assyrians regarded Lower Egypt, the Muzur, so often mentioned in the cuneiform inscriptions, as their permanent fief, the districts of Patoris were virtually an Ethiopian province. Middle Egypt formed a march contested on both sides between the two kingdoms, and at the same time a barrier which tended to hinder the outbreak of open hostilities between the one and the other. Thus, the old priestly race succeeded in again acquiring full possession of Thebes, the city out of which Shashank I had chased them so ignominiously. The loss of the city of Yemen was to them equivalent to suffering a conquest. As in Lower Egypt, the foreign rulers were content with drawing a tribute from the petty kings, so in Patoris and Middle Egypt, petty kings or vassals were set up by the Ethiopians, whose supremacy these princes had to recognize and pay their taxes. Thus, the great kingdom of Kemet was split up into the little independent states, which lent now on Ethiopia, now on Assyria, as each foreign master gained preponderance for the first time. About the year 766 BCE, A revolt broke out under an enterprising petty king of Sais and Memphis by the name of Tefnext. The Teknakis are Tamatha Cathus of classic writers. Profiting by the momentary weakness of the Assyrian Empire, he prevailed on the other princes of Lower Egypt, would join him, and made an inroad with his whole force upon Middle Egypt, where the Egyptian vassals of Pionks at once submitted to him. The tidings of having reached Pionksek, he forthwith sent orders to his generals to check the advancement of Tefnext, and so to force the bold petty king to beat a retreat. Subjoined is a translation of the memorial stone of Pionksek, discovered several years ago at Mount Barkel. This monument, a granite block covered with writings, was set up there by the Ethiopian king Pionksek in remembrance of his conquest of Middle and Lower Egypt, and will show far better than any description the several stages of the Ethiopian expedition and the peculiar position of Egyptian petty kings. Of these, we give a list according to the account furnished by the stone. King and General Tefnext, Prince of Sais and Memphis. King Nimrod, Lord of Hermopolis Magna. King Aputh of the nome of Kleisma. General Shoshank of the city of Busiris. General Ta'a Yemen Alf Anks of the city of Mendes. His eldest son, Ankhar, commander of the city of Hermopolis in Lower Egypt. Now, Her is, we know that as Horus mostly. The hereditary lord Bek en Issa, General Nes na Ae, or Nes na Keti of the nome of Sois. King Lorsarkin of the city of Bubastis. Prince Teftot Bast in the city of Cleopolis Magna. The hereditary lord Pet Essa in the city of Athrebis. General Pa Teneth of Pa Saptu, the Arabian nome. General Pa Ma'e of the second city named Busiris. General next Horna Shanu of Fagroriopolis. General of Tanis, not named, being a native Assyrian. General of Ostracine, not named for the same reason. Prophet of Her, Pet Her Sam Taoe of the city of Letopolis. Prince Hero Besa of the city of Sasa and Hasaue. Prince Ta'a Fe'au of Kent Nefer. Prince Pa Besa of Babylon and Neopolis. And the Heliopolis nome. By the term vassals means the princess. The princes subject to Pionksek. In the 21st year, in the month Gahote, under the reign of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Yemen Marie Pionksek, may he live forever, my royal majesty issued the command that men should be informed of what I have done more than all my predecessors. I, the king, am a part of God, a living image of Tmu. As soon as I came out of my mother's womb, I was chosen to be ruler, before whom the great men were afraid, knowing that I was a powerful lord. His mother well knew that he was destined for a ruler in his mother's womb. He, the godlike benefactor, as he called himself, the friend of the entities, the son of Ra, who had formed him with his hands, Yemen Marie Pionksek. Messengers came to inform the king, the lord of the West Country, that is the western part of the Delta, the great prince in the holy city, Sais, Tefnux has established himself in the known, the names legible, in the nome of Xois, in the city of Hapu, Nilopolis, in the city also unreadable, in the city of Ain, in the city of Pa-Nut, Memphis, and in the city of Memphis. He has taken possessions of the whole West Country from the Mediterranean coast of Buto up to the boundary city between Upper and Lower Egypt. He is advancing up the river with many warriors. The inhabitants of both parts of Egypt have joined themselves to him. The princes and lords of the cities are like dogs at his feet. The fortresses are not shut against him. The nomes of the south, the cities of Mere Tamu, Maidun, Pa Sexum Xepera, Crocodilopolis, the city of Uasarkan the first, at the entrance to the Fayum, Hamas, Aksur, Kankas, Kanath, and all the cities of the west have opened their gates to him through fear of him. He turns himself to the nomes of the east. They open their gates to him, namely the following: Abanu, the Phoenix city, Ipanon, Ta'e Ut Ae, and Aphroditopolis. He's preparing to beleaguer the city of Heracleopolis Magna. He is surrounded with the ring. None of who would go out can go out. None of who would go out. None of who would go in can go in because of the uninterrupted assaults. He has girt it round on every side. All the princes who acknowledge his power, he lets them abide, everyone in his own district, as princes and the kings of the cities. And they do homage to him as one who is distinguished through his wise mind. His heart is joyful. And the lords and the princes and the chiefs of the warriors, every one according to this city, sent continual messages to his majesty to this effect: Art thou then silent, so as not to wish to have any knowledge of the south country, of the inland regions? Tefnux is winning them to himself, and finds no one that withstands him. Nimrod, the lord of Hermopolis Magna, and prince of Ha-Uer Megalopolis, has demolished the fortress of Naphros, and has razed his city with his own hands through fear that he should take it from him in order to cut it off after the manner of the other cities. Now he is departed to throw himself at his feet, and has renounced the allegiances to his majesty. He is leagued with him, like any of the other princes, the lord, by the nome of Aksur Hunkus, has offered him gifts according to his heart's desire of everything that he could find. Then his majesty sent orders to the princes and captains of the army who were sent over the land of Egypt, namely the captain Pa'uwa Roma and the captain La Misketne, and to his majesty's captains who were set over the land of Egypt, that they should hasten to prevent the arming for war, and to invest, to take captive its inhabitants, their cattle and their vessels on the river, to let no laborer go out to the field, nor suffer any plowman to plow, and to blockade all that were in the city of Hermopolis, and to fight against it without ceasing. And they did so. Then his majesty and his warriors to Egypt, enjoining upon them very strictly: take care, watch, do not pass the night in the enjoyment of play. Be on the alert against the attack, and be armed for the battle, even afar off. If any says, the army and the chariots are to turn to another city, why will ye delay to go against its army? Ye shall fight as he has said. If any attempts to fetch his defenders from another city, turn about to meet him. If any of these princes should have brought with him for his protection warriors from Marmarica, our combatants from those faithful, arm yourselves to fight against them. As an old hero says, it avails not to gather together the warriors and numerous chariots with the best horses out of the stable, but when going into battle, to confess that Yemen, the divine, is he who sends us. Even when you have to defend your country, you don't have to make it totally secular, right? When you have arrived at Thebes, in sight of the Temple of Apt, go into the water, wash yourselves in the river, dry yourselves up at the chief canal, unstring your bows, and lay aside your weapons before. The king, as the Almighty, no strength shall the man have who despises him. He makes the weak strong, and however many there be of him, to be of them, they must turn their backs before the few and be one. He copes with the thousand. Sprinkle yourselves with the water from his altars of sacrifice. Fall down before him on your faces and speak to him thus. Show us the way to fight in the shadow of thy mighty arm. The peoples that go forth, these shall beat down the enemy in many defeats. Then they throw themselves prostrate before his majesty. Is it not thy name that makes our arm strong? It is not thy wisdom that gives firmness to thy warriors. Thy bread is in our bodies during all our march, and thy mead quenches our thirst. Does not thy power give us strength and manly courage at the thought of thee? An army is not, whose commander is a coward. And who is like unto thee? Thou art the king whose hands create victory, a master in the work of war. When they had gone down the river, they reached the city of Thebes, and did all that his majesty had commanded. Proceeding down the stream upon the river, they met a number of vessels sailing up the stream, the soldiers, sailors, and captains of the best warriors of Upper Egypt, equipped with all munitions for the war against the army of his majesty. Then they inflicted on them a great overthrow. No one knows the number of their prisoners, together with their ships, who were brought as living prisoners to the place where his majesty resided. When they had advanced further to the city of Heracleopolis Magna, they arrayed themselves for the battle. The following is the list of the princes and kings of Lower Egypt: the king Nimrud, and the king Aputh, the general Shashank of the city of Busiris, and the general Yemen Auf Angst of the city of Mendes, and his eldest son, who was a military commander of the city of Hermopolis Parva, the warriors of the hereditary lord and Esek, and his eldest son and general, Nesna Ae, and the nome of Xois, the grand master of the fan bearers in Lower Egypt, and the king Uesarken, who resides in the city of Bubastis, and the city of Ranefer, and all the princes and kings of the cities of the west side, on the east side, and of the islands between. They had gathered themselves together at the bidding of that one, and they sat thus at the feet of the great lord of the west country, the princes of the cities of Lower Egypt, the prophet Nit, the lady of Sais, and the high priest of Ptah, Tefnext. And when they had advanced further, they inflicted on them a great defeat, greater than ever, and captured their ships upon the river. When the surveyors had fled, they landed on the west side in the territory of the city of Papek. When the earth had become light in the early morning, the warriors of his majesty advanced. Against them, the army joined the battle with the army. And they slew much people of them, as well as their horses. No one knows the number of the slain. Those that were left alive fled to Lower Egypt because of the tremendous overthrow, for it was more terrible than ever. The list of the people who were killed, men, and the rest of 21 is left blank here. They don't, it's not legible. The king Nimrod advanced up the river to Upper Egypt because the news had been brought to him the city of Hermopolis Magna had fallen into the power of the enemy. meaning the warriors of his majesty, who had captured its inhabitants and their cattle. And then he came before Hermopolis, but the army of his majesty was on the river at the harbor of the Hermopolitan Nome. When they heard that the king had surrounded them on all four sides, that none could go either out or in, they sent a messenger to his majesty, Yemen Marie Pianxe, the dispenser of life, of the complete overthrow which had been prepared for them by all the forces of his majesty. Then was his majesty furious against him, like a panther, and said, then did they leave a remnant of the lower Egypt surviving, and suffer to escape from them. Whosoever would escape in order to give information, that he might advance so that they should not suffer death, make their escape. I swear as truly as I love the entity Ra, as truly as I hollow the entity Yemen, I will myself go down to the river. I will frustrate what that man has done. I will drive him back even should the struggle last long. After performing the solemnity of the customary rites of the New Year's feast, I will offer a sacrifice to Yemen. At his beautiful feast, he shall celebrate his procession on the beautiful day of the new year. I will go in peace to behold Yemen on his beautiful feast of the Theban month, Ta'afi. I will cause this image to go forth to Yip of the south on his beautiful feast of the Theban month, Ta'afi, on the night of the feast, which is established for Thebes, and to which the sun entity Ra first instituted for him. I will conduct him back to his temple, where he sits on his throne, but on the day of the entity's return, on the second of the month, Athir, I will let the people of Lower Egypt feel the weight of my finger. Then the king's warriors remained in Egypt. They had heard of the wrath which his majesty had commenced against them. Then they fought against the city of Hamas in the Aksur Hunkit Nome, and they took it like a flood of water, and they sent a message to his majesty, but his heart was not appeased thereby. Then they fought against the very strong city of Tahan, now Tahma, and they found it filled with soldiers of the best warriors of Lower Egypt. Then they made the battering ram play against it, which threw down its walls. They inflicted on them a great overthrow. No one knows the numbers among them. It was also the son of the satrap Ephex. Then they sent a message to his majesty, but his heart was not appeased thereby. And they fought against the city of Habanu and broke it open, and the warriors of his majesty entered. Then they sent a message to his majesty, but his heart was not appeased thereby. In the month Kahota, on the 9th day of the month, when his majesty had gone down to Thebes, he celebrated the feast of Yemen on the Theban month Ta'afi. When his majesty had sailed down the river to the city of Hermopolis Magna, he came forth out of the cabin of his ship, caused the horses to be harnessed, and mounted his war chariots, the names of which were the fear of his majesty reaches to the Asiatics, and the hearts of all men fear him. When his majesty had marched on, he threw himself upon the haters of his warriors, full of wrath against them. Like the panther, are they not standing there? Fight, I tell you. This is loitering over my business. The time is at length come, once for all, to make the land of Lower Egypt respect me. A mighty overthrow was inflicted upon them, frightful for the slaughter which they suffered. Now, there's a huge difference between respect and, oh, I'm afraid of you, I'm going to obey you or something. But we will continue with the rest of line 31 in the next program. Sharma. Peace be upon you.